I purchased these 3 filing cabinets from an auction several months ago, and they've just been sitting here in the garage. Then my X-Tool came along, my CO2 laser, and I needed somewhere to put it. I put 2 of these on little rolly carts and added a desktop that I had lying around and then put the laser on top of that. And this is what I've been using, but there are some problems with this. First of all, because these aren't attached to anything, they're a tipping hazard, especially with a fair bit of weight in the bottom drawers. I'm going to be redoing this little setup, and oddly enough, this table that I rated for my workroom a while back would have been perfect for this laser if I'd had it at the time, but it has another job. For now though, I'm just going to put the laser on this and just roll it out of the way so I can get to work on my cabinets. Now, this laser weighs about 100 pounds, so whatever I put it on needs to be very sturdy. And believe it or not, these cabinets are pretty sturdy, but they're dangerous right now. In this video, I'm going to be removing the bases to make them a little bit lower, adding 6 heavy-duty caster wheels to the base, cutting up an old table to make a new countertop for it, putting it all together and slapping some paint on it. Stay tuned. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. Before you lose it on me for painting these are made in 2008 by Bombay & Company, primarily MDF with a little bit of wood veneer. This is the kind of stuff I don't even think twice about updating with paint. So at the moment, these are just holding on to a bunch of random stuff. I've got shipping blankets and a lot of heavy items like castors and furniture legs. And the problem with this is that because it's not attached to a base or a top, it's a tipping hazard, and I have to be really careful when I'm opening the drawers. On the backs of these, there's even a hook for you to attach it to the wall. It's meant to be secured, so that's something I really need to do. But first, I need to take all of this stuff out. Now, because I'm going to be using this setup for my laser, I'm going to have to find new homes for all these things, but that's okay. Most of this was just stashed here temporarily. Check out this fabric I got. It's very kind of mid-century, funky, retro. Anyway, I think it's really cool. The shipping blankets are going to end up in a tote downstairs, and probably the same with these vintage furniture legs. These are things that I do use, but only in very specific situations, so when I do need one, I'll just run downstairs rather than taking up space here in these cabinets. I have a couple of tables I picked up for free or extremely cheap, and they are not attractive tables. In fact, I picked them up specifically for the purpose of repurposing them. So this one is solid elm, but it's made up of several thin boards. I think the widest one was about 4 inches, most are around 2 to 3 inches. So I'm going to cut the rounded edges off and try to cut these boards down pretty much where they used to be before they were glued together. This is solid elm, so I will use this for repairs or maybe even building something later on. Now this other tabletop is actually over 1 inch thick and it's solid birch. And this is what I'm going to be using to create what was supposed to be a new base, but once I got it cleaned up and had that crappy old finish off, I realized I really liked this wood and decided that instead of adding wheels to this and flipping it upside down, I would actually use this as my new top. People sometimes ask me about maintenance on some of my sanders and other equipment, and this is a good example of something that comes up every now and then. Now, I've been using this Surf Prep as my primary sander for quite some time now, and it's finally time to replace this bottom pad here. These do tend to get worn out after a while. Even my DeWalt, I used to buy replacements for that, so you can keep using the sander without having to throw it out. You just replace these bases. And it also gave me a chance while the backing pad was off to kind of clean up inside this area here, make sure there's no sawdust or buildup of stuff. Then I just pop the new pad on and away I go. Now, I did mention that initially I was thinking about using this as the bottom, but I opted not to for a couple of reasons, and one of those reasons will actually kind of come into play with how I use this on the top as well. So this is solid birch, but as you can see, it's made up of multiple boards all glued together. And because I need this top to be wider than the cabinets, which is not ideal, but it is what it is, I don't want to put any stress on these last two boards here. So I was worried that if this was my base and I put wheels on the end and you get all the weight of the cabinets, the weight of the laser, I was worried that something could possibly happen to make these two boards snap off at some point. So I decided not to use it as my base. I'm going to use it as the top instead, and then this over here will be my new base. But I also have to be aware of where the legs of the laser are, and they sit about 6 inches in from the back of the laser. So even with this overhang, all of my laser feet will be squarely on the cabinets themselves, putting no pressure on these outer boards, and that's really good news. So I'm cracking a new jar of Odie's, which if you've used Odie's oil before, is very exciting because it smells so good when you take the top off. But as you can see, it's quite thick. It's like a sticky, gooey, thick honey. You want to stir it really well, not just when you first open a jar, but every time you go to use it. You want to reconstitute all those ingredients, mix it up. Sometimes I use these white non-abrasive pads to apply it. I tend to prefer these gray Merkur Milan pads. I use the 1500 grit. It does come in multiple grits. You just want to make sure that whatever grit you're using is a lot higher than the last grit you sanded with, or you could scratch your wood while you're applying the finish. So the raw color of the wood is beautiful here, but unless I did some sort of pickling or whitewash, this is what the natural color of birch looks like with a finish on it. And you can see I've got a pine table over there that's the same color. My main workbench is yellow, so I just come to accept the fact that my workroom is full of furniture with a yellowish tint. It's not my favorite, but it is what it is. And actually, I don't mind it on this piece. So this is a pre-made desktop. It is laminate, it's not real wood. This is what I was initially going to use as the top, but obviously, as you know, have since decided to use as the base. Now there's a few things I need to consider when I'm putting this on. Firstly, I want the base to be wider than the cabinets. I need to have a little bit of extra width, which is going to help make this whole thing more secure. These castors have locks on them, so even though I'm tucking them out of the way, I still need to be able to reach under and put those locks on or off. I also need to make sure that I'm not drilling my pilot holes too deep, so I'm just adding a piece of tape on here to mark how deep I need to go with these. These laminate countertops are hard and drills have a tendency to sort of bounce around on them, so I'm just using a punch here to punch down through that top layer so that I can drill so much easier. So I made sure with these outer wheels that they were supporting the cabinets themselves, they weren't on the edges. These middle ones, on the other hand, you'll notice I'm turning them so that it's kind of spanning both cabinets. I'm just trying to figure out how to do this with least amount of stress on this laminate base and the most support for the cabinets. And again, this piece of laminate is wider than the cabinets. The cabinets themselves are actually fairly narrow. But having a slightly wider base, even though it's going to look a little bit funny, it's actually going to make this more stable. And I was 3 screws short of a full set here. I don't know why, but the package that these wheels came with, there wasn't enough screws, so I had to go buy a few. They're not black in color, but no one's gonna see it, and they're the same size, so it doesn't even matter. So as far as attaching the cabinets to the base, once I flip this over, I'm actually going to be screwing down in through the bottom of the cabinets into this laminate on the other side, of course. So let's get these right side up. Now these are super heavy, and I'm actually just removing the drawers to make it a little bit easier to do this next part. And as always, there's some treasures inside. There's a pill bottle from the States, which is interesting because I'm in Canada. So flipping this upside down now, you can have a look at this base. There are leveling wheels on here. I'm not going to need them for what I'm doing. To someone just looking at this, this might look like it's all wood, but if you look closer, these side panels are actually MDF sandwiched by veneer, and this is pretty common in this style of furniture. A lot of people look at Bombay and assume it's really high quality furniture because it's expensive, but it's just MDF with veneer. And I did not do the best job of removing this. I probably should have taken my time a little bit more, so there's a few areas where the MDF has actually torn. So even though this won't be seen, I still want to repair that. I also want to make sure this is as flat as possible. Now, why did I take the base off? A couple of reasons. First of all, it's going to be easier to secure this to the base, but mostly it's just because I found it a little bit too high. Having it, 4 or 5 inches lower is really going to be helpful for me. Once I have all of those repairs done, I'm going to turn it onto its side. So I'm looking now at the bottom, and you can see there's a couple of screws here. Those screws are actually screwed into a thin piece of wood on the inside. So that is what I'm going to drill down through, just to give it a little bit more support than drilling straight through the MDF. Once I have this one done, I'm going to get to work on the other cabinet. Now, I should have mentioned earlier, but when you're taking the drawers off, there's usually 2 little latches on either side. One you push down, one you pull up. You do that at the same time, pull backwards, and that will pop the drawers out. So I'm just removing this base the same way, only I went a little bit slower. I took my time a bit, and I did have less damage, so that's good. And I need to make sure that these stay together. So I actually drilled a couple of holes through the centers and put some bolts in. So that's going to make this one uniform piece. Before I literally attach this to the base and the top, I'm going to make sure everything is exactly where I want it, including on the top. And once I'm happy with how it looks, I mean, as happy as I can be considering it's oversized, I'm just going to take this little punch here and mark the holes on the bottom so that I can pre-drill into the laminate. Up inside the top here, there's actually little wooden trim pieces. So that's what I'm drilling into here as well. And then I'm actually going to screw up from the inside of the cabinet into the new wood top. Now, I mentioned before I am going to be painting these cabinets, but I lied when I said I was going to be slapping paint on it. It's actually a term that drives me crazy because I don't know anyone that literally slaps paint on things. But anyways, point being, even though I'm going to be painting these, I'm not going to be painting the tops. They're never going to be seen, and I don't want the paint to, over time, adhere to the bottom of this wood top, so I'm just leaving them. I cleaned them up and that's where they're going to stay. So I pre-drilled some holes into the top as well, and then secured both the top and the bottom to the cabinets. Finally, time to clean the insides and outsides of these cabinets. They're super dusty from being in the garage for so long. In certain lighting, this actually looks pretty good. The dark cabinets look really nice with the light wood, but when you look up close, it's actually quite scratched and scuffed, and it doesn't look that nice in real lighting. Even though I'm still working on these, I won't need to move it around anymore, and I'm finished with the top, so I'm just putting the laser back on it. My workroom has been torn apart for days working on these and another project, so I'm trying to tidy things up, so I just put the laser back on. So the knobs obviously just screw on, but these keyhole escutcheons do not. Normally they're just tapped in place. These are actually glued in, and I'm afraid that if I try to pry them out to paint, I might tear some of the MDF, so I'm just leaving the keyhole escutcheons in place, and I'm going to try to paint around them, which is a huge pain in the butt, but it is what it is. As far as colors go, Fusion has some new colors that I've been wanting to try, and this is one of them. It's a beautiful color called Cambridge. It would keep that dark light contrast with the wood top and bottom. But in the time it took me to scuff sand all of this, I actually changed my mind. And I decided to try another new color, which is Newell, which is a very soft, kind of sage greenish color. I just thought this would look really pretty with the light top and bottom. But the main reason I opted for this over the darker one is because this is a workroom and it gets pretty dusty, and the dust is not going to be as visible on this lighter color compared to a darker color. So as with a lot of paints, when they're wet, they tend to look a little bit lighter than they're actually going to dry, and that is definitely the case with this color. This looks much lighter here as I'm putting it on than it actually dries, and you'll see when I go to put on the second coat how big the difference is between wet paint and dry paint. This ended up only needing 2 coats of paint, and after I applied my second coat, I decided to take a little walk. It was a lovely day. I just went down the street to this park just for a breath of fresh air. This is actually a tidal river, so right now the tide is out, and when it comes in, all of this grass that you see is covered in water. It's pretty crazy. One thing I forgot to do though before I went to the park was to pull up my tape while the paint was still wet. So unfortunately it dried and I needed to just very gently cut it free, but it did a really good job of protecting that bottom. And Freya is working very hard at being helpful here. She is growing like crazy. So overall, I'm super happy with this. Obviously, it's not the big splashy reveal that you're used to on this channel, but considering what I started with, I'm super happy with how this turned out. My only sort of issue with it is the fact that I had to make the top and base so much wider than the cabinets, but it's okay because it's supported in all the areas it needs to be supported, and that's fine. Even though these are MDF mass-produced pieces, I know there's some people that are going to be like, oh, why did you paint it? Because I wanted to, and I really think that the light color is going to work out much better in here in terms of showing dust and stuff like that. This gives me lots of storage room for my laser supplies, and these plastic containers, which I have a ton of, actually slide really easily back and forth on the track for the files, so that worked out really well. As far as this bottom ledge sticking out a bit, I'm really tall, and when I'm standing in places for a long period of time, such as on the side of this with my laptop while I'm using the laser, it's kind of nice because I can just put my foot up. Anyways, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching this. Keep in mind, I still have that third cabinet, and I want to do something completely different with that one. I think I'm actually going to use the laser to cut out some veneer inserts for those squares where the knobs are and use different types of wood veneer, and I think that'll look really cool. So stay tuned for that. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.